Well, if you think back about 10 years ago in our country's history, the first thing that may come to mind is racial rioting in many of our big cities. It was the culmination of a lot of things, of years of frustration and anger in our ghettos. And with the disorders came shock and fear. In July of 1967, President Johnson appointed a commission on civil disorders to find out not only what caused them, but to try to figure out what could be done to stop future riots. And this report from the Kerner Commission is what we're going to investigate today. What's been done about their recommendations in the past 10 years. And looking back can be quite painful, however, when talking about relations between the races.
It's all for one, and one for all. Together we'll overcome, divided we'll fall. From slave ships to the championships.
By the way, that last face you saw in that film was Alan Backey, a white man who says he's been a victim of reverse discrimination, and will be taking up this issue too in a little while. One of the conclusions the Kerner Commission came to on violence was that we're one nation moving toward two societies, one black, one white. But they said a choice is still possible to change the course. Massive economic programs on a national scale somehow seem beyond the reach of the person on the street. But changing attitudes of our children, our own children, is within our reach, and Dr. Lee Salk visited a school to find out how kids feel about race.
Children are not born prejudiced. They become that way, and not because of contact or lack of contact with other races or nationalities. They pick up the attitudes of the adults in their lives. I went to a first grade class to find out from 6- and 7-year-olds what their feelings are. We took our cameras to Miss Walensky's class at PS2 on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It's a racially mixed school of Chinese, Hispanic, black, and white children. I talked to the children about race and prejudice and how well they get along with each other. Some people are different colors, right?
Yep.
What colors are the people that you know?
I don't know. They don't got no color.
They don't have colors?
Nope.
I was in your classroom and the children are different colors.
What? What colors?
Well, don't you know?
Nope.
Do you think it matters what color people are? Whether they're black or white or Chinese? It doesn't. How do most people feel? Does it matter to most people? Do you know what prejudice is? It means when a person says you're prejudiced. Do you know what that means?
No.
What color would you say you are?
Pink.
What color would you like to be?
I like a
You like the way you are. If you could be any color you wanted, what color would you be?
Black.
What color would you like to be?
Blue.
Blue. You'd like to be blue. Christine, does it matter what color people are? Does it? It doesn't. What color would you like to be?
White.
You'd like to be white. What color are you? What?
She's tan.
She's tan. And do you think it matters whether she's tan or white or blue? Do you know any blue people?
I know blue people.
What?
I know blue people.
You don't know blue people. Which ones are the better ones?
The white people. We have different color eyes.
Different color eyes? You look at Billy's eyes.
His is black.
His
Yours
eyes.
is brown. And mine is blue, light blue. Sky blue. No. I call it light.
So what does it all mean?
We're different kind of people.
What?
We're different kind of people.
Does it matter that you're different kind of people?
No.
In my visit to this school, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the children to explain the word race as anything other than an auto race or a running race to see who gets to the finish line first. These children react to each other as individuals and pay little or no attention to racial differences. If your child uses racial words and you ignore it, you're condoning it. You must react and let them know how unfair and hurtful their remarks can be to others.
One of the most controversial issues affecting people on the job today is affirmative action. Carl Stokes takes a look at both sides, and Jack Cafferty tells us about an NBC poll on the issue when we return. But first, let's listen to a Spanish woman and her daughter from the South Bronx.
Color, la gente americana.
My mother just said was that she never had any problems with any person of any color.
As we've mentioned, the Kerner Commission was created because of the violence of the 60s. Now, 10 years later, there isn't as much violence in the streets, but the causes of that violence still exist, and Jack Cafferty is here with some poll results on this. Jack?
Chuck, last summer's blackout brought to light the anger and the despair that still exists in our ghettos. That anger during the blackout took the form of looting and arson, and we asked New Yorkers to tell us what caused it. According to our News Center 4 poll, the most frequent reason given for the looting was the economy. And it's interesting to see how that response breaks down along racial lines. 1 out of 5 whites said the economy, while the figures were twice as high among blacks, 40%. And 1/3 of the Hispanics cited the economy, too. In other words, in both the black and Hispanic communities, where unemployment often runs twice as high as in the white community, the economy and the lack of jobs were seen as the real causes of the looting. One way the government has tried to enforce the Civil Rights Act and increase minority hiring is through affirmative action programs. An NBC News poll taken nationally last summer shows whites and blacks feel very differently about affirmative action. We asked a nationwide sample of 1,600 people whether companies should go out and recruit minorities. Only 1 out of 3 whites said yes, but almost twice that number of blacks, 64%, said they thought minority recruitment was a good idea. Not surprisingly, 60% of whites questioned told us they were opposed, while less than half that number of blacks, 29%, told us they were against companies seeking out minorities. We also asked what companies should do in hiring minorities. Should they lower standards? Should they maintain the standards and try to hire as many minority members as possible? Or should they hire only according to qualification? And here again, the response differs by race. Only 2% of the whites said that the standards should be lowered. The vast majority, almost 95%, said either qualification should be the only standard in hiring minorities or that standards should not be lowered. In other words, no special allowances should be made. But 15% of the blacks questioned said they think standards should be lowered in hiring minorities. The majority of blacks, although not as many as whites, said their race should not get any special treatment. 78% said standards should not be lowered, and qualification for the job should be the only standard. Chuck?
Thank you, Jack. 10 years ago, the unemployment rate for blacks was almost double that for whites, and today the figure is virtually the same. But when it comes to employment, one of the biggest changes is a program called Affirmative Action, which has been quite controversial in its application. And Carl Stokes has more on that for us now. Carl?
Thank you, Chuck. The purpose of affirmative action programs is to correct past discrimination against minorities in order to try to bring about true equality of opportunity. But what we are finding on the job today is racial friction. With fewer jobs available, more and more whites are questioning how far and how fast minorities should be brought into the club. It's a matter of perception. One person's opportunity or goal is another person's quota.
12 years ago, it was hard to find a black face at the New York Telephone Company. A mere 2% were in management. Only 11% were in the total workforce. Today, that's radically changed. 10% minorities are in management, 23% of the total workforce. This was due mostly to a class action suit brought by the Bell System employees, charging rampant discrimination in hiring and promotion. They won. In 1973, a court forced the company to create an affirmative action plan with specific targets or goals based numerically on the racial makeup of the general population. Officials say the program is successful and has promoted good morale.
Good morning, Mr. Robinson. May I help you?
Arthur Robinson is a case in point. He joined the company as a clerk and remained in that job for 7 years. 6 months ago, he applied for the company's upgrade and transfer program. He passed the test and the interview and qualified for several positions. Now he is a business representative answering customers' questions and complaints. His paycheck is 30% heavier.
I think there is some friction because some people are benefiting over others, and naturally someone's going to feel left out. Someone's going to feel that they're being discriminated indirectly, directly.
There are some pluses and minuses, probably. I think it's been good in the sense that more and more females and minorities in greater numbers are moving into various jobs, any job in the company. And the more people work together, I think they get to know each other, and that certainly, in my book anyhow, tends to improve things. I think on the other side, affirmative action, just by the very nature of the term, means that you're going to do something special. You're going to make a special effort for some groups that you're not going to make for other groups. And I assume that if you're in a group that is moving ahead faster, possibly, getting ahead faster than in the past, you feel pretty good. Others may feel that they are missing some of the opportunities that they had experienced in the past.
Young defends the affirmative action program as a target, not a quota system. This letter from the president of Rutgers specifically acknowledges there is a quota system in the Newark Law School. It was sent to the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith, which is handling some cases of so-called reverse discrimination against white males.
The trouble is that affirmative action has been distorted into an anti-democratic, racist concept, and merit, the system of judging on individual worth, has been destroyed.
Joseph Feldman is a case in point. He worked for the city's Department of Social Services for 37 years. He claims he was coerced into early retirement because he is the wrong color.
My client's rights, Mr. Feldman in this case, his constitutional rights, his civil rights, his moral, his ethical rights have been violated. However, Mr. Feldman is being made to pay the price of slavery, Reconstruction, and all the discrimination that has gone forth against the non-white population in our country. And it's unfair that he should be made to pay the price.
The whites in my department feel that they can't be promoted on an equal basis, that their careers are stopped compared to other people. I am particularly sorry for younger people in my department who have to face years and years of this kind of thing.
The society had a practice of favoring white males over females and minorities in almost all aspects. So consequently, you got that kind of employment, and we're determined that that shall not be the way it is in the future. People should have the equal opportunity.
Commissioner Kramarski is in charge of the New York Division of Human Rights, which handles compliance with the civil rights laws. whether the discrimination is reverse or otherwise. And as you can see, there's a tremendous amount of work to be done. Files are everywhere, in garbage cans, on top of filing cabinets, on radiators. The backlog is extraordinary. Only a year ago, 5,500 cases were filed. This year, they anticipate 10,000 complaints. And the great majority will be because of race discrimination on the job. Instead of adding to the staff to assist with the backlog, the state cut the division's budget.
The Kerner Report called very clear attention to a nation which was separate and unequal. We had some very good years after that in many ways because the economy could sustain a decided effort at overcoming the effects of discrimination. In today's society, the economy is not in a position to do that, and much of the evil of the years prior to that time are beginning to reappear.
All of us on both sides of the issue, I put the bigots aside, have the same goal. We all want to see achieved an equality of opportunity regardless of race, regardless of creed, regardless of sex. The argument is about the methods for achieving the goal, the tactics, the strategy. And unhappily, the extremists have added a quotient of ill temper into this thing where each side is accusing the other side of bigotry or bias.
There's no question of the polarized positions on the issue of affirmative action. Some whites' anger over what they claim to be a quota system that ignores qualifications has collided with some blacks' anger that efforts to stop affirmative action is just the old order of past discrimination. Later in this broadcast, B'nai B'rith Counsel Arnold Forster will join me and other guests live in this studio to discuss the ramifications of affirmative action. Chuck?
Thank you, Carl. We have this bulletin in from United Press International, moved a few minutes ago. Police officer Robert Torsney was found innocent by reason of insanity in the shooting death of an unarmed teenager on a Brooklyn street last year. Police officer Robert Torsney innocent by reason of insanity. Is it possible for any person, regardless of color, to buy or sell a house to whomever he or she wants? Well, Connie Collins investigates this in about 2 minutes, but now let's listen to a woman from Chinatown.
The Chinese race supposed to be very good, but now they change. People talk about black people, Puerto Rican people. They're doing something bad, but we always hope they will improve.
In 1968, Congress passed a law called the Fair Housing Act, and that law was supposed to outlaw discrimination in the sale and the rental of homes and apartments. So we sent Connie Collins to find out just how fair housing is.
Welcome to Laurelton, a neighborhood in Queens, one of the most unusual neighborhoods in New York City and perhaps the entire United States. What makes Laurelton unusual is that about half of its 20,000 residents are white and half are black, making it one of the very few fully integrated middle-class communities. After nearly a decade of court battles, legislation, the Fair Housing Act, and higher-paying jobs for minorities, Laurelton should not be a phenomenon. Both federal and state laws prohibit discrimination in housing, yet a census map of Queens shows whites clustered together in white neighborhoods and blacks clustered together in black neighborhoods. Why aren't there more fully integrated communities like Laurelton? One of the answers lies in a practice known as racial steering. Brokers steer blacks into black communities, claiming there's nothing available in white communities. The Open Housing Center in Manhattan investigates complaints of steering and discrimination. They get their money from companies who want fair housing for employees, and they say discrimination is worse than ever, whether buying a home or renting an apartment.
All white areas, generally speaking, are all white because that's the way the community wants it. And I think that when houses are put up for sale in that area, while the law says one may not discriminate, people do inform the broker as to what kind of family they would like the house sold to. The broker doesn't want to alienate the community, else he won't get any more listings, and consequently does not offer the house to the family of color.
Do brokers ever protect themselves and show a black family a home in a white area and with the words, but a deposit has already been made on this?
That generally is what happens, yes.
Mr. and Mrs. Melvin Eason live in Oakland, New Jersey. Finding a house they wanted was not easy. They felt they were victims of steering, and they did something about it. Last February, they took their case to federal court and won $6,000 and a public apology from a real estate broker.
We felt that we had at least pursued this, that this was not something that was just going to be snuffed under the rug. We felt we had every right as everyone else to be treated as fair as they. We had worked hard and earned the money, and we felt we should be shown everything that was available. Fair housing is there for everyone. I think more people should realize that fair housing is there. They are there to work with you. They're there to help. They're willing to work. They're very competent. And I think if more people would realize this and pursue these things, because we are not unique.
Blacks are not the only victims of steering. When a neighborhood begins to change, whites are often steered away from buying homes there. We take you now to Brooklyn and a neighborhood undergoing change. When Mr. and Mrs. Sal Alberico saw homes in their neighborhood go up for sale, they saw brokers showing homes to only minorities. Yet when they formed a block association and offered homes for sale through word of mouth, 9 out of 10 buyers were white. They say brokers told them whites were not interested in their neighborhood. When Mrs. Alberico talked with one realtor about his prejudice against whites, this is what she was told about her neighborhood.
The schools in my community were no good. They were bad. The teachers weren't qualified enough for the children. All right? Look at the streets. They're dirty. The streets are dirty all over. That's our problem with sanitation. We're taking care of that. We fight that. We're getting results. And on and on to that effect. Look at your neighbor down 2 blocks away. They're black. You're not going to get a white family to want to come and move in on your block. If down the block from you they're black, why not? Why not? That's one family. They're people. And this is how we kept going on. And I'm saying, I can't believe this. You're going to try and scare me into selling my house, something that I really treasure? What's wrong with you? It made no difference. This man was saying, sell it. In 5 years' time, you're not going to make your money. Sell.
Discrimination in housing is often very subtle. Many realtors do not discriminate, but many still do. The only way to find out if you are or have been a victim of discrimination is to complain. Federal and state agencies set up to protect you do not have the money or the manpower to check all the realtors all the time. So despite the law, it's up to you to report charges to the proper agencies. Chuck?
Thank you, Connie. Well, it's getting close to the top of the hour now, and we'll be right back with more news for you. But first, we're going to hear from a newly arrived Israeli man.
It's a beautiful country. Very nice. And it's a nice living, nice people. These little problems have everybody. And this is in every country.
No matter what race, color, creed the individual might happen to be, his economic situation keeps him in the same depraved state.
I should tell you that the still pictures you have been seeing throughout our broadcast tonight were taken by Barbara Pyle. About 10 years ago, the country was in the throes of racial unrest in many big cities, and out of that traumatic period had come a mandate for change. It was called officially the Report of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, known to most people as the Kerner Commission Report. One of the areas they singled out was the media, and Melba Tolliver is here now with a report. Melba?
Well, Tony, the media may have never been so severely criticized as it was 10 years ago. That is, as you said, when the Kerner Commission accused television and newspapers of failing to communicate the seriousness of the race problem in America. Further, it said that whites and blacks alike got an unreal picture from the media of what life in this country is like for millions of black people. It was a stereotyped world for the most part, inhabited in the early 50s by the likes of Amos and Andy. Black actors played them on TV, but on radio they had been played for years by two white actors who created the original characters. In the mid-60s and 70s, television's closed doors started to ease open to black entertainers on variety shows, as featured players on dramatic and comedy programs, as stars on shows of their own, and as reporters in TV news.
I think that's correct. Things have changed, but only in the sense that this whole society has changed to some degree. So television is reflective, I think, of the fact that, say, 15 years ago, black people never had headaches on television. They never kissed. They never fell in love. They never got married. And they almost never held a job that wasn't at the absolute bottom of the heap, very menial. So that has changed. That society has changed. So that now we are seeing black people portrayed a little bit more humanely, shall we say. And I think that the influx of minorities into the medium has helped to change that. It's part of a big thing: education, agitation, and legislation. But the input that I think blacks have made has been to see blacks, see themselves in another light that has not been there beforehand.
Bob Teague has worked for major newspapers in Milwaukee and New York, and in 1963 he came to NBC as one of the first black TV reporters. Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement had gained media attention by the early 60s. In the summer of '67, the country was stunned by rioting in Newark and dozens of other cities. And in detailing some of the causes, the Kerner Report, in a chapter on media, made recommendations to the industry for improving both minority hiring and coverage. Elmer Lauer was then president of ABC News.
Maybe it took the Lindsay-Kerner Commission to rub our nose in it that we weren't doing a good job, or maybe it took the riots in the central cities in the summers of '65 and '66 and '67 to do it. But in any event, whatever the cause was, I think you can date it from the mid-'60s on when coverage of the minority communities became better.
There's been some improvement, but in terms of the day-to-day living conditions that most people have to cope with, in terms of the reality of that situation, and relative to the amount of space and time that's available, there is nowhere near the proportion that there ought to be at this point.
Bryant Rollins is a seasoned journalist and executive editor of the Amsterdam News. It is the country's largest weekly. Like other special market publications, it caters to readers who often feel neglected by the major white media. Charlene Hunter, former New York Times reporter for 8 years. She once headed the paper's short-lived Harlem bureau.
Issues now are more complex. It was easy to cover the movement, so to speak, because it was dramatic. The issues that affect people now are less easy to illustrate in dramatic ways, like the basic economic issues, the impact of the recession on black and disadvantaged communities. I think that it's more difficult now for anyone who wants to cover the black community to relate those issues to, to what is really happening.
Minority journalism professionals are estimated to be about 1% in newspapers, about 3% in television. Gloria Rojas, former teacher turned reporter, and one-time lawyer Geraldo Rivera both got their start, as Michelle Clark, the late CBS correspondent, did, in the Columbia Summer Program for Minority Journalists. Bryant Rollins directed the program for 2 years. After 7 summers, the program lost financial backing and closed. But by then, it had trained some 230 minority journalists.
I would travel around the country, and it'd be hard for me to go to a city where there wasn't a person from the Michelle Clark program whose byline I wouldn't see or whose face I wouldn't see on television. Tremendous impact as far as that's concerned. As far as the national need is concerned, no, I think it's apparent today that there's been a withdrawal in all levels of society and in all areas of our society from concerns that have to do with black people. And you can see it everywhere, a massive withdrawal that some people have compared with the betrayal that occurred after the Reconstruction period.
Things have changed for minorities in and outside the media since the 50s and the 60s. That's a fact. But many people believe there is no longer that same spirit for change today in the media or in the society as there was a decade ago. Tony?
Thank you, Melba. Roselle, New Jersey used to be a quiet town, but there's something there that has got the people in an uproar: schools. I'll have that story for you right after we listen to this woman from Little Italy.
They're human beings. One God created us, right? Equal rights, right? That's about it.
Roselle, New Jersey, just west of Elizabeth. About a quarter of its 23,000 residents are black. A fight over racial balance in its schools has been going on for a decade or more. Last year, a plan finally went into effect. But the controversy hasn't died, and the Roselle Citizens Committee, which opposes the plan, has come up with an outspoken ally.
She is a member of the NAACP, the National Conference of Christians and Jews.
Her name is Myrtle Whitmore, a former manager with the New York Housing Authority. She lives in Brooklyn, Crown Heights, but on this night she was in New Jersey to speak at a meeting called by the Roselle Citizens Committee, the RCC, in its fight to restore neighborhood schools. And neighborhood schools, as Myrtle Whitmore sees it, are a legitimate, in fact highly desirable goal, not a code phrase for racism. In the past, she reminded the Roselle audience, the black drive for civil rights got crucial support from whites.
But now I think that whites who are caught up in this present situation and are being called racists and bigots just for demanding their civil rights need sympathetic, understanding blacks to speak out. I think it's only fair.
And it is a violation of civil rights, Mrs. Whitmore said, when children, black or white, are forced to travel long distances for the sole purpose of racial balance.
Now, it's not just enough to desegregate, to integrate, to have freedom of choice, but now you must have racial balance. So many whites balanced by so many blacks. You know that our children have become checkers on a checkerboard. They're being moved from place to place by bureaucrats to satisfy their whims.
Busing is not involved in the Roselle controversy, nor is the local high school, which has an enrollment that's about half black and half white. Plan A, as it's called, applies only to the town's 5 elementary schools. They were already integrated, although unevenly, with one of them almost all black. Plan A, imposed under heavy state pressure, is designed to produce more racial balance. To do that, it splits the elementary school system into 2 segments. Some schools upper grades only, others for the lower grades. Some children, including very small children, now have to walk or be driven beyond what would have been their neighborhood school to a different school that may be as far as a mile away.
These children wouldn't have to walk down to this area. They would probably go down to the Wilday School. And remember that the Supreme Court decision in 1954 said it was wrong to make a child pass a neighborhood school to go to another school because of his race. But aren't we doing that now? And with the white children, you know, they begin to believe the myth that they're superior. If people go around telling them that, you know, blacks have to sit next to you in order to learn, well, these little kids get say, well, I must be something special. Most blacks go along with the idea that it's an insult to say that a black child can't learn without being seated next to a white.
In New York, Mrs. Whitmore has been working to build bridges across racial lines in opposition to what she sees as self-defeating, destructive attempts to engineer artificial race ratios in defiance of social realities and the best interests of blacks and whites alike. In Roselle, the message was the same.
Form new coalitions, black and white, for the good of the schools, the community, and the country. Now change your attitude. That's the final thing I want to say to you, that this madness must stop. You can't be afraid of being called a racist or an Uncle Tom. You have to stick to your principles. And you can't waste time on this busing and racial balance when you have other priorities. When you ask that question, can we return to neighborhood schools? I say, with God's help, we can. It's up to all of us. Thank you, and God bless you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
But not everyone, to put it mildly, joined in the standing ovation. Roselle is a town divided.
It is groups like the RCC who has proposed this meeting tonight that can continue to foment distrust among individuals and races rather than integrating people and helping people to live together.
I believe that this is an integrated world, and the only way you are going to get along in this world is if you learn to get along with people in your formative years.
At what point do we learn to live together?
Well, Mrs. Whitmore, how would you reply to that?
At what point do we learn to live together? When we respect each other's wishes, when we don't force something on other people.
Well, that's going on in South Africa now.
We're here now. Let's talk about Roselle.
Well, you know what? You live in New York, and I'm here, and I live in Roselle. Neighborhood schools are becoming obsolete. I'm not talking just on a racial basis. I'm talking on the basis of that you don't have enough children to put in these schools.
But insofar as neighborhood schools are feasible, would you favor neighborhood schools or not?
Particularly not in a place like Roselle, because we are a neighborhood. Anytime you have a town that's a mile by a mile and a quarter, that is a neighborhood in itself. And I'm speaking for my neighborhood. I am not a black that they brought out of New York to speak to blacks.
Let me tell you something. There are some people who will never want to live together. That's their right. There are some people who like to live, whether they're black or white, with their own. That's their right. Let me tell you, you can move whomever you wish into a community, but you cannot make the other people stay.
The schools in Roselle are close to 50% black now. Critics of the racial balancing plan say it's inducing enough whites to leave the public schools and the town so that the end result will be resegregation, heavy black majorities in all the schools. Proponents say the plan will work if it's given a chance to work. We'll be exploring that controversy further tomorrow night and Friday night. As we have been saying throughout the broadcast tonight, it has been about 10 years since the racial explosions of the late 60s. And that led to the report on violence from the Kerner Commission, which recommended massive changes if we were to remain one nation undivided. Carl Stokes has some guests now to discuss where we've been and where we're going since that report came out. Carl?
Thank you, Tony. My guests this evening are John Lindsay, who was vice chairman of the Kerner Commission, former mayor of New York City, and now with ABC as a commentator. Yolanda Sanchez is a director of the Puerto Rican Association for Community Affairs and is on the board of the East Harlem Redevelopment Corporation. Alan Forster is legal counsel for B'nai B'rith Anti-Defamation League. And Nate Jones also is on the Kerner Commission as an assistant general counsel and is now legal counsel with the NAACP. John, since the Kerner Commission report almost 10 years ago, have you noticed any changes in race relations, or do you feel, as the Commission predicted, that we are one divided nation, separate and unequal?
Well, Carl, I like to think of the Kerner Commission report, which is this, the paperback volume, as a positive document that recommended positive programs for the country, not negative programs, focusing, as I read it and think about it, as we wrote it, principally on jobs. It recommended that 2 million new jobs be created instantly. 250,000 in the first year, 300,000 the second year, and then escalated upwards to be completed in 3 years. 1 million of those jobs in the private sector, helped by incentives, tax incentives, and 1 million in the public sector. That has not happened. And without new jobs, you're not going to solve the problem.
What about the proposition that the nation would be divided, separate and unequal?
Well, I think, Carl, because most of what was recommended in this report has not been done of a positive nature, housing, job training, vocational training, education, you name it, because it's not been done, I think you have as much, or if not more, polarization than ever in the United States.
Nate, you agree with that?
I would agree with that, and I think one of the basic reasons is, in addition to what Mr. Lindsay has suggested, is that this government and this society has changed the rules. The Kerner Commission's thrust was to try and restore confidence in the system, make the system work, provide grievance mechanisms whereby people could have a method by which they would vent their concerns and their frustrations and aggravations. They wouldn't have to go to the street, because the commission came about because of the riots. when we urged that there be a restoration of a system and the creation of a system whereby people can seek redress, that was pursued by many groups and many individuals. There were lawsuits filed, there were cases brought, there were victories won. And as soon as we began to march toward the goal line, suddenly we began to be advised, withdraw from the courts, let's change the rules, let's change all the precedents, and let's do away with the provisions in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Let's start labeling programs.
Well, who's been doing that? Who's been advocating that?
Well, for one thing, it's been a politically effective tool. It's been brought about by organizations and individuals who are opposed to further progress.
Like who?
Well, for one thing, with regard to the schools and desegregation of the schools, we find this great cry for neighborhood schools, preserve neighborhood schools. Let's mount an attack on busing. With regard to affirmative action, many organizations that have been allied with us and have aligned themselves with us in the struggle thus far see the whole question of affirmative action differently. And we hear the terms and the code words of reverse discrimination and other kinds of code terms which suggest many, many ominous things to those of us who have tried to work within the system.
Alan, much of the fight against the affirmative action program has been led by some of the prominent Jewish organizations. So what is the reason for that, and what do you see
Well, I think it's a
next step?
misstatement, Carl, to suggest that it's against affirmative action program. I think we believed at the beginning with the Kerner Report, and still believe, as John indicated, that legitimate, genuine affirmative action would bring correction. That's fair recruitment, fair examination, scholarships, special educational training, everything that would help lift up the disenfranchised and the cheated in this country to an equal opportunity. I think as a result of the incorrect conclusion that this was not the road, it was abandoned, and a cheaper road was taken. Let's throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's go for quotas.
Cheaper road?
I'm going to tell you. The quota system. A quota system where you assign jobs, opportunities for schools, housing by numbers, depending, as we look across the country, on the proportions in the population. And once you start to do it by numbers, you're perpetuating the racism system that has benighted this country for 100 years, and you're on the road back. And I think the evidence is now clearly, regrettably, that we're moving to a divided society.
I don't think we're moving, I think we're there.
Well, that,
Getting worse.
No, that would be my point. I mean, my contention has always been the Kerner Commission was calling for something which is impossible, the un-American state of equality for all. It's never been in America, and as far as I'm concerned, is not today, and I'm not sure it will be in the future. So that I am saying, and I would agree, you know, we are no further along than we were in 68 or 67. If anything, we have taken giant steps back, but certainly the Puerto Ricans have in all socioeconomic factors.
Well, John, if it seems that there's some sort of unanimity about this, then if we haven't made progress in the next 10 years, then are we to be satisfied that in fact nothing is going to be done in the next 10?
I think, Carl, we're in trouble. I think the country's in trouble. I think the political climate is bad at the moment, and the political climate is it's as if we were calling for mediocrity everywhere. And with mediocrity, you're not going to get the guts to create 2 million jobs, to create the action programs that will take teenage non-white kids off the streets who are there hustling and terrorizing whole neighborhoods because they have no work and they're not trained for work, and this has to be faced.
Let me ask you, Arnold, how do you think that this can be turned around?
Well, first I want to agree that the situation is getting worse. And if it is, then we must examine what we're doing to see whether or not we're doing it incorrectly, which I believe we are. I think we have to recognize that we're living in a white, racist society. I think we have to recognize that the correction there is not by arbitrary quota systems, but by every possible advantage to the disadvantage that will enable them to compete equally. And we must not let go of the opportunity in a rich country to give the disadvantaged and the poverty beholden what they need.
I regret that we just don't have further time to pursue it. Let me thank each one of you, though, for being with us. Tony, thank you.
We could not let an evening pass without bringing you Jim Van Sickle with the business news. Jim?
Well, I hope you don't let an evening pass without that. Are things as bad as some of the more pessimistic bears would have us think? We keep getting